We're coming up on the tail end of the week. We got a lot going on. My name is Kevin Berman. I work for First Five Alameda County. I am the co-founder and program administrator for the Alameda County Fathers Corps. And thanks for joining us. We're going to get started. I just got a few reminders for our Fatherhood Partnership grantees who are on the call, which should be all of you. Your coaches should have contacted you. Many of you coaches have already observed your groups. If they haven't observed your groups yet, then they should have at least contacted you to start scheduling those observation opportunities. So keep an eye out for that. That's Michael Gibson and Carlos Guerrero are splitting you. So Carlos has 4, Michael has 4 of you. Surveys are protective factor surveys for fathers. So that protective factor survey has been modified so that it is father specific. Those were emailed to you yesterday. The links to those were emailed to you yesterday. Am I correct on that, Virve?
Yes.
Perfect. So Virve sent you the links to the English and to the Spanish. We're asking if you can please build in time to one of your groups for the fathers to complete that survey. It is very important that we get feedback from dads directly. We are one of the only programs at First Five that is still collecting data directly from parents. This will help us and make our case for increased funding for you, for your father's programs. So that is important that we get those out. We want dads who have attended at least 3 of your sessions to complete those surveys. Anthony, you got a question?
Yeah, it's related to the observations, because I remember last cycle, I think I had the pleasure of having Michael out to view our group. Are we supposed to get are we also supposed to get feedback or response on those, or how do they serve us, or more for your perspective?
Both. They should be providing feedback to you as well. So let me know. It sounds like that may not have happened. So let me make sure. I'll check in. Darren and I will check in with our coaches to make sure that they're providing you guys with feedback. Good question, though. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Also, part of your grantee requirements, if you remember in your contract, we asked that you attend at least 2 additional First Five trainings. So just so you know, those 2 additional First Five trainings can be father-friendly provider network trainings as well. So if you could attend the partnership, you can attend 2 additional father-friendly provider network trainings, or you can attend any of the trainings that are offered by First Five. Those trainings are free. Let me know if you need more information about that. Virve can make sure that you're on the list. You should be on the outreach list for training at First Five, but if you're not receiving those announcements, please let Virve know and she can get you added to the list. Also, remember, there are reporting requirements for this grant this year. Last year, because the grants were so small, there were no reporting requirements. This year, with the increased amount, there is increased reporting. So if you have any questions about what those reporting requirements are, excuse me, please refer to your accountability plan. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to me or Karen, preferably Karen, because we got a lot going on over here. But if you reach out to me, obviously I'm going to answer any questions you might have. Some of those reporting requirements require some specific tracking you're supposed to be doing. Nothing too complex, just more of how many people are in your groups, things like that. So there's that. Keep an eye out for the end of year survey as well. You guys know we do an end of year survey every year. So right around May, immediately following our last training in May, you will receive a link to an end of year survey. Again, I know a lot of this, it's a lot, but this is very important, again, for us being able to tell our story, which increases the amount of funding that we receive, which ultimately will increase the amount of funding that you guys receive as well. And again, we want to show the impact that we're having, because I know that we're having an impact. And then the summit. You guys should have received the summit, the 2022 Alameda County Fatherhood Summit. Is going to be June 18th, the Saturday before Father's Day. It's going to be a virtual summit. We are not at a place where we feel comfortable bringing all those people together just yet. So it is going to be a virtual summit, 9:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. I know it's not a long time, but just the idea of expecting folks to spend their Saturday in June with us for more than 2.5 hours sitting in front of a computer just didn't seem right. So we shortened it up. Thank you, Dara. Here's the flyer for the save the date. You guys should have been emailed this flyer. Let me know if you have not. We can email it to you. Please share it far and wide. This is a free summit meant to celebrate, acknowledge, and honor the critical role that fathers and father figures play in the lives of their children and in their communities. I want to say, I think that's all of the housekeeping stuff that I have. Dara, did I miss anything? Virve, did I miss anything?
No, you're good.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker today, Mr. Jason Seals. He's been working with the Father's Corps for many, many years now at this point. It's always a pleasure to have him join us. He's just a sharp brother who I could just, there's some people you can just listen to talk all the time. Well, he's one of those. Smart dude. Appreciate him finding time in his schedule to be with us today. And Jason, with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you and step back.
Give thanks. It's good to be here this morning with you all. I'm glad you all have found time in your schedule to be present with me today. So we're a small group, but we have a lot of rich information. My style is very much dialogue engaged. So I have a slide, I have presentation, but I want people to feel free to engage with the material as we go through. That said, let me go ahead and share my screen. I know we're on Zoom, so make yourself comfortable, get yourself some water, whatever you need. What I will say is, in terms of my slide deck, I will be sharing this with Kevin, and he can share it out with you all. But if there's something that just, you want immediately, take a picture of it, if you're on your phone, you snapshot it or whatnot, but you will have access to this stuff. So don't feel like, oh, I need to hurry up. If you feel so inclined to take a picture of it, please do so. I don't mind sharing any of this stuff, because most of the stuff that I share with people, I tell people all the time, this has been gifted to me over the years. And so I've kind of made it my own from my experience, from my partners that I've worked with over the years. And so to me, this is communal knowledge that I'm sharing. Can everyone see the slide presentation? Give thanks, give thanks. So for me, anytime we're starting, it's always really important just to give land acknowledgement. So, I'm in the Bay Area, I'm in Oakland specifically. We are mostly serving the Bay Area, and we are on the Alonia land. And so for me, it's really important to acknowledge the land that we're on, acknowledge the harm that's been done, but also acknowledge the opportunities for healing and reconciliation for the people of this land. I always am very thoughtful too that in this work that we do as community organizers, as advocates, as family members, that we've lost a lot of people that have been committed to this work. And so it's always important for me to take a moment of silence just to acknowledge life. Give thanks. So today's topic is about mental health and wellness. And for me, as a facilitator, I'm very thoughtful that you come into these spaces, especially on Zoom since the pandemic, where it's like we might not even know who this person is. But now they're going to spend some time with us on Zoom, and we're supposed to be engaged and feel like we're connected to them. And so for me, when I think about mental health and I think about wellness, for me, my foundation is my family. I think about the people that help to shape me, to help provide understanding in my life. And that has helped me understand, like, what does it mean to have joy? What does it mean to have peace? What does it mean to love myself? And so on here, you know, on the left-hand side, you have little me, and my father and my mother. And what's interesting about this picture is that that picture was taken in a maximum security prison. My father actually has a prison uniform on. And so my mother and father have been very instrumental in my life. I'll give thanks for both of them. The picture below is my grandmother, and my dad. The center picture here is me and my two kids at San Francisco Zoo. This right-hand picture here is me and my son. Now he's 8 years old. He is my new teacher. If you are a parent or if you've been around children, you know they are very informative. I have a way of negotiating spaces, and I watch him negotiate spaces with me. And it's a moment of reflection where I say, oh, this is how I look. This is how I'm often articulating myself. He talks with his hands very much like I do. And so it's interesting. But I give thanks for him. And the picture below is when I took my mentee to New York. He said he wanted to go to school in New York. And I used to live in New York and went to school in New York. And I said, well, I don't know if you understand what it means to be in New York. And so I took him to New York so he can have that experience before he went to school there. But this is my community, right? And so I think that community is extremely important when you think of wellness, when I think of the steps that I take daily to preserve my peace and to give back to myself. So I wanted to start here with people, just so people can have a sense of, well, who is Jason Sills? So one of the things I want to get the group's feedback on is how does wellness feel? Right? How does wellness feel? That's the question that I want to start off with. And I stopped the screen share intentionally so we could see each other, because unfortunately, when the screen share is up, I can't see everybody's face. I think I can see like 3 people, and it's like more people on the screen. And so I always take a moment to drop it down so we can have a community engaged space. So we can just do popcorn style. Anybody can start. What do we think in terms of how does wellness feel?
For me, Jason, it feels like, I don't know, it feels manageable. Like you can manage all of that's going on in your life. Nothing's too much, nothing's not enough. But everything is just manageable. And you can do it in a fairly stress-free way. Because I think you can be stressed out and still be well. You can still experience stress and still be well. It's when it starts feeling unmanageable where I feel not so well.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that we have to begin to have a relationship with is our stress. I know that's a new approach for some of us, but we have that relationship with our stress, because as I tell some of the folks that I work with, being stress-free means that you're no longer with us, unfortunately. Other thoughts?
I just put it in the chat, but for me, wellness was waking up with no stress, no carryover from stress from the night or the day before, waking up refreshed and being able to go with no stress the next morning.
Yeah. So you're saying basically being able to be free of the things that were boggling you down the day before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No carryover.
Yeah. Good. What else? What does it feel like?
I think
For me, it comes the sense of balance. To have, first of all, my needs, my basic needs, satisfied or met in a way, but also a sense like I think kind of related what you were saying before, a sense of like I can manage. I mean, stress is always going to be there. There's no matter what. And I think at a certain point, the stress is not so bad. It can bring some good things about me, make me aware, make me in a way kind of like put in the best of me in order to resolve situations. But it's a matter of balance. I think too much of a good thing is too much. It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
I was going to add to the idea of manageable, like I think it's awareness. Like I feel wellness feels like being aware of what's going on, how much stress you have, how much, I think I went through a period this last year where I was pretty overwhelmed and unwell, but I didn't know it. Like I felt like it took over, and it took a point, like a breaking point, to understand an awareness to understand that I was going through something. So that awareness helped me figure out how to change it.
Good. Which, that's a good transition. What are some challenges to wellness? What are some of the things that causes barriers or difficulties for us to experience wellness?
I don't know. In my work, is the feeling of like sometimes that no matter how much I try, things continue the same in a way. Especially when you're working with community and you see over and over same type of things, a system that systematically makes things the way they are. So some sense of helplessness.
Yeah, good.
I think.
Go ahead, Anthony.
I think my community's wellness affects my wellness. I feel like I think what I've noticed during the pandemic and some of the stuff that goes around in my immediate community affects all of us, right? Like in a certain way. So that's one of the barriers or challenges, I should say.
Yeah, give thanks. I appreciate that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Not being able to take a break or catch your breath, always on the go and not creating space to kind of just breathe and relax. And I understand that's pretty, that's coming from a space of privilege to be able to do that. But, because a lot of families are out here, they can't take a breath. They nonstop gotta go, and they feel like they won't survive if they don't move that way. So not creating space to breathe and heal.
Mm-hmm. Well, you speak on two things. That one, I think the pandemic has created a culture of us being on Zooms and us not actually scheduling enough time for that space. So because before the pandemic, we might have a meeting across town. So we might stop, get something to eat, get something to drink, right? It might be in transition, but you had a moment in your car, a moment to yourself just to breathe, relax. And then we got on Zoom and it's like, I can do 11, I can do 12, I can do 1. And it's like, well, how are you actually doing all of this, right? And so the pandemic has actually created a culture of less space, right? So that's one point that comes to mind when I hear what you're saying. The other thing that I would say is that, unfortunately, because of lack of resources or where people are at socially in this world, we often feel consumed with responsibilities. And it doesn't feel spaciousness for us to be. And I think that's where oppression, racism, sexism, patriarchy, whiteness, I can go down the list of social toxins that take away from our wellness. And so I think you bring up two interesting points. And what I would say to the latter, speaking of folks from marginalized communities, we have to feel empowered to take that space back, right? Because I think when we feel empowered, then we're able to dictate our quality of life. There's so many things outside of us that's impacting our quality of life, but there are things that we can feel empowered to curate. And once again, I want to acknowledge, to Kevin's point, like some of this conversation is very privileged, but I'm also speaking from someone that grew up in Oakland during the crack era, from a single mom that was working to take care of a household of multiple people. And I can remember those days of getting up with her at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to work with her at times when there was still First Interstate Bank in Oakland. This is before Wells Fargo. And my mother worked at the bank, and I would sit under her desk while she worked because she couldn't afford daycare. And so going to work with her literally was part of my reality. And so I speak from a place of knowing that some of these things that feel very difficult can be done. But it's also being willing to step out and challenge some of the ways the world impacts us. Dear, did you say something? Because I think you're on mute.
I said, amen.
Oh. Any other thoughts around those two first questions we have, which was, how does wellness feel, or what are some challenges to wellness?
I think some of what you touched on also is just the feeling of that you deserve to be well. You deserve to take time for yourself. You deserve to catch your breath. Mm-hmm. And some folks in our communities don't feel like they deserve that. Mm-hmm. Because of some of those social toxins that you talked about. Yeah. So just, feeling that you deserve it and that you've earned it by just making it through the day.
Yeah. And I think I offer these two questions as reflections to bring about awareness, because I do recognize that sometimes the way that we live our lives doesn't allow us to sometimes recognize what is happening around us because we're moving, right? And I think people are knowledgeable, but it's just having a moment to reflect. Well, because to me, when I say, how does wellness feel? What I recognize that happened is that no one told me how it feels. That's where we have to get to, like, what is the feeling, right? Because we can articulate a lot of things, but I think the feeling is powerful. And that's part of the practice. The other thing is that we've normalized the challenges in a way that has allowed us to live in our sickness. We've normalized it. So if you normalize it, there's no alert, right? It's kind of like, how many folks on here, by a show of hands, have ever taken like Tylenol before? Or Advil? Okay. Now, usually if you have a headache or body aches, and be like, okay, I'm gonna give me some Advil or some Excedrin or some Tylenol. You go for what your drug of choice is, right? What is that drug doing?
Desensitizing you to the pain.
Desensitizing you to the pain. Dara said masking. It's both of those, right? When you have a pain in your body, what is your body telling you?
Something's not right.
Something not right. And then your response is not to think about it. Your response is not to figure out what really is wrong. Our response is to, I don't want to know that my body is telling me something is wrong. So I'm just going to take this pill and then not feel what my body is communicating there's an issue. Because it doesn't address the real issue. So for instance, I'm going to speak on my body. Oftentimes when I get a headache, I'm dehydrated. So my body is saying, Jason, drink some more water. I just take a Tylenol and I'm good to go. No, drink some more water. You didn't address the real issue. Now you just can't feel me communicating to you. That's the same thing that we do around our wellness when we basically normalize like operating in our pain or in our stressors or in our challenges. We normalize, oh, this is how it is. So then when you do get sick or you do experience, illness, then it's not actually seen as a problem that is a result of what you've normalized. Because it's like, this is how we function. This is normal. So what I'm challenging, like, let's not normalize our challenges and how we move through those challenges. I think we should actually do the opposite, which is acknowledge what does it take to navigate these spaces daily, our daily tasks with the challenges that we have. And I know, I think when I say that to you, I think about my grandmother who's real old school, and she would probably be like, boy, we don't have time for that. But we do. We have to actually celebrate and acknowledge what we're enduring daily. I think that makes us a little more thoughtful and a little more aware of what we're taking on. So that's our starting point, folks. Questions, comments, thoughts before we jump into this video clip really quickly.
Well, I just wanted to say, like, this, even in this Zoom meeting, like there are different senses when we share a space together that we're aware of that connect us, right? Like how we smell, how we sound, what else is, I see the books in your background, or I see, a window in mine, but there's other things that we share together. And I think the screen desensitizes us from certain experiences. One lady, there was a woman who crashed her motorcycle out in front of the library this last week. And I went out there, she was in a lot of pain and broke her leg, and everybody started pulling. I was directing traffic and it was an intersection, and everybody came with their cameras, really, they wanted to film the experience. Nobody got out to help her, but they just wanted to film her. And it made me feel like that's where we're at now. We're looking at life through a screen.
Yeah.
And it desensitizes us to a lot of the spaces that we share together.
Yeah. That's powerful. I appreciate you sharing that, because I would agree. I think we're in a time period where there is a disconnect. And I think I was on a Zoom yesterday and we were talking about the convenience of Zoom. We don't have to leave our homes. We don't have to worry about transportation. So we're saving on gas, things of that's part of the conversation, right? But to your point, Anthony, there is a way in which we connect on a human level that is missed, right? I know as a presenter, we were talking about this prior to getting started, because they had mentioned, oh, your PowerPoint is so bright. And I was saying, I have to do tricks now. Like, I have to get fancy, because before, when I was face to face, I relied on my energy, being present with people. I can't rely on that. I need visuals to keep people like, oh, I can't wait for the next slide, right? Like, it's like an anticipation, right? So to your point, Anthony, there is a disconnect. And I think we're missing out on something. And I'm not just speaking about this moment. I'm speaking about in general in this time period where we aren't having human connection as much. We're missing out on something. Any other thoughts, comments, or reflections before we jump into our video and the rest of our slide deck?
just I think that there's this myth that men or fathers don't appreciate conversations like this and won't participate and engage in conversations like this. And I think it's a myth. I think that when we bring up things like this in our groups that we're working with, the conversations go a lot of places. And I think the dads really appreciate being able to talk about how, being able to talk about wellness. What does wellness mean to you? What does wellness feel like? A simple question like that gets them thinking and talking in a way that they may not have in the past. And they may not even realize that they needed or wanted to talk about it. But when you present it or when you raise the question, you get a lot out of it. That's all I'm saying.
No, give thanks. I appreciate that. We definitely need more spaces curated to have intimate dialogue, but these spaces have to be safe. The facilitators have to be consistent, and they have to be relatable. I think there is some intentionality we have to be thoughtful of in creating those spaces, but it's definitely needed. That said, in our video, I wanted to share this video because I think this video is interesting. It's a young father talking to his daughter, and when I hear the conversation between the two, I thought about this topic of mental health and wellness. So we're gonna watch about 3 minutes of it, and then we'll continue.
When do you feel closest to me?
When I feel closest to you, when we went on vacation,
Oh, okay.
and we went canoeing and we went fishing.
We went canoeing and fishing. What about on a daily basis? What makes you feel close to me on a daily basis?
When you're off from work and I'm off from school.
Okay. Now, you want to ask me a question?
Who do you look up to the most and why?
I don't know if I have a particular person that I look up to the most, but I have a type of person that I look up to the most. So the type of people that I generally tend to look up to are people who have children and have a job that they love to do, but they find a way to keep it balanced. So although they do a very important job, they also understand that family is important and they find ways to balance it. Is it my turn? Ooh, who is your best friend and why?
Well, you're my best friend because you're always there for me when I need your help.
I know, baby.
Describe what you were like before we met. How have I changed you?
When Daddy was younger, I wasn't someone who really had much consideration for other people. I didn't really care how other people felt. I didn't really care what my actions meant to other people. And then when I met you, when you came into my life, I realized for the first time that I had someone who depended on me 100%. And for someone who never really cared about what other people thought or what other people felt, I realized that I couldn't continue to think like that, and that I needed to grow up, and I needed to be a man, and I needed to do things that were gonna take care of you and mommy and myself. And basically, the person that I am today largely is because of you.
So what did you all hear from their dialogue?
A deep, deep connection was obvious. And I heard, I don't know if you can hear love. That's what it sounded like.
Yeah.
For me, it's like communicating the normally unsaid, you know, like I feel like there's something about, as a father of little ones, I can't wait to do this card game with them. Like, but that there's a reason why I want to do it, is because I think about that, about myself as a man, as a father, but I don't know if we communicate that enough. So I like the idea of being prompted and having that space to share that, either verbally it could be with your child, or it could be with, you know, if you're co-parenting with the other partner, other parent, or even in a group, and just having the space to actually say what you might feel in your head.
Mm-hmm. What emotions did we see? Like, is it, I don't know, when I watch it, I'm watching one thing, right? I hear one thing, but like what I feel that's coming from their interaction is something else.
Well, for me, what I heard was a lot of vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just be raw in a way. And I had mixed emotions, you know. I felt like, honestly, I would like to just hold that child,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and the guy too, because there was so much vulnerability, so much things that, like Anthony said, you never say, and you know, but also I felt it was very healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Vera said, saying the unsaid. Khalid talked about their wellness and happiness depend on each other. I also felt like, as much as they were being vulnerable, I felt like the dad was still holding back. Right? There was something that he hadn't processed, something that he's holding that wouldn't allow him to go there, to that place, you know? And I'm not sure if that's I'm a dad, I'm being protective. I'm trying to make sure my daughter doesn't see me go there, right? I'm trying to protect her, or he's still just processing, having his human experience. But in any case, what I wanted to do is I wanted to show that, because I think as fathers and working with fathers, we should be thoughtful about what people are carrying, right? We should be thoughtful about what's their experience in totality. And we're not always going to get it right, but I think a mindfulness.
When do you feel?
I think a mindfulness needed on our part. And so which takes us to this slide here, right? Can you all see this slide that says stress? Yes? Okay, good. So I put this together because we started off talking about, what is wellness feel like, and then what were some challenges. And stress was a word that came up, interestingly enough. I put this here because I think one of the barriers to wellness is not acknowledging and or recognizing stress, and us not having the skill and or practice to manage our stress. As it was alluded to, there's normal responsibilities, right? So I have things on here from like being on probation to something like just not enough sleep. Those are two separate ends of the spectrum, but they're both real. I have racism on here, which we have to recognize the role that a social toxin such as racism plays in someone's wellness. It is a challenge. It is a barrier. And sometimes because we don't see how people are harmed, it's not measurable, then we often aren't able to see how it's harming someone. But I think about every time I'm pulled over by a cop, I pay attention to my body. So I'm having a physiological experience. So every time I see flashing red, white, and blue lights, it's impacting me physiologically. It's actually a barrier to my wellness. And this is a level of mindfulness that we have to have as fathers, as providers, as collaborators to other fathers. So whether it's a lack of support, and when I say lack of support, I'm talking about who's the community, right? Are we thoughtful about the community that people have or lack thereof, or how we can support them with developing a community? Finances is important to be mindful of because, love and nurturing and consistency are all very important behaviors and or attributes as it relates to being a father. But being able to provide is also important, and not being able to provide or fear of not being able to make ends meet creates another stressor. You can go housing, unemployment, health. And when I put health up here, I'm talking about not health related to stress. That could be it, but just like health realities from maybe how people have learned to cope. It could be alcoholism. It could be, them having, issues with their physical being because of life circumstances or being born with, not having an ability to function, as other able-bodied people. And so being mindful of health, relationships, right? I think the initial relationship that comes to mind is that either that co-parent or parallel parenting relationship with, the father's mother. The father's child's mother. But there's all different types of relationships that people have. There could be work relationships, family, romantic, so forth and so forth. Sometimes relationships, the dynamics, the communication, the expectations, it creates stress. The responsibility of being a parent. I tell people all the time, the greatest job I've ever been given is to be a parent. It is so rewarding. It brings the most joy to my life. But I'm also very mindful that it has its challenges and it can be stressful. And the stress ranges. Like sometimes it's stressful driving my son in traffic to karate. But when I get to karate and seeing him and his growth and his joy brings me joy. So sometimes stress is momentary. And then also recognize that that stress, I don't want to minimize, but I'm also recognizing that it's a privilege that I have the access to a car, to money, to take my son to an extracurricular activity, to support his wellness and growth. Like I'm mindful of all those things, but it's still a stressor, right? Time management is real. You know, there's some time it feel like there's not enough time in a day. And so that can be a stressor. I put up here grief, and not just grief in the sense of losing someone. I think that is our initial response when we hear grief. But sometimes it can be loss of a job. Sometimes it can be loss of a friend, like the relationship ended. We no longer talk. It could be grief over, sexual desire, which a lot of men don't talk about. When a lot of men experience depression, there tends to be spectrums of experiences, but there's also like the ways in which you could be on one end of the spectrum or another. And sometimes we see where men they develop coping to grief by doing things excessively. It could be drinking, it could be sex, it could be, other self-destructive behaviors. But at times it looks totally opposite, where there is no interest in sex. And when a man becomes conscious of this, he might experience some grief, like, man, I don't have the same desire to be sexually active as I once was. And this is something that most men will not speak aloud about, because there is a fear of being shamed or a fear of being ridiculed, because so much of how we think about men and masculinity is associated with sexual behavior and sexual appetite. We spoke about racism. We think about fear of failure, whether it's around children or one's own expectations. It's real. Whether people know it or not, how you eat and what you eat actually impacts your body physiologically. One of the things we should be mindful of is that stress sometimes is so apparent we could feel it. And then other times it's extremely subtle. And because it's subtle, we don't recognize how things are impacting us. I have a watch on that I wear that, because I'm a runner, it tracks my heart rate and things of that nature, but it also tracks my stress rate. And I remember one time recently, I was having a meeting, and I remember feeling bothered in that meeting, and my phone beeped and said, take a break. That was the message my phone gave me. And I said, oh, wow. Like, I didn't even recognize how stressed I was getting. But obviously my blood pressure spiked in a way that indicated that there was an issue. Well, are we all wearing watches? Or if we did have a notice, will we pay attention? And do we have the response? Meaning, when you are stressed, what tools does one have? Can one remove themselves from that moment? Do they have the practices in their life to say, oh, okay, here's what I do daily to nurture myself. One of my things for me, I'm a runner. So the thing that I do to reduce my stress, I run every day. I try not to miss a day, because I recognize how it feels for me. It feels very much meditative. I go into my own world. It is my food. So when we do have these indicators, do we have the tools? We have loneliness and isolation, which doesn't mean people don't have family and or relationships, but sometimes if we don't have a constructive, supportive space to emote, share, reflect, we still feel lonely. And then we have the last two, which is death and probation. You know, I think a lot can be said about both, but what I would say is that, do people have the tools to support themselves around transition because it's normal? And then with probation, I think as providers, we have to create spaces, recognizing that there is a looming stressor that is either spoken about or not spoken about, that's present for a time period. And it creates restrictions on one's life that sometimes doesn't allow them to function at their highest level. Are we mindful as providers to create space to reflect, engage, and support around navigation, or just emoting? Like, how does it feel without there being a response, or without there being a way that we minimize someone's experience? Thoughts, comments, reflections about that slide there.
Jason, you touched on it in a few of those words that were around death and but violence, community violence also. I couldn't imagine, I mean, actually I could, because I was I grew up in the 90s when Oakland was crazy as well. So just being a 15 to maybe 30-year-old right now, Black man, brown man, that alone in Oakland is stressful. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like literally, I remember in the 90s when I was growing up, teenager, just literally, like I used to think about dying. Like, you go to the store, something could happen.
Yeah.
You go to a party, stuff happens. It could be you one day. And I'm sure that is on every, person's mind who is in traffic. You know what I mean? As a man, not even just as a man, because there's girls out here being, killed as well. So that is something else that just doesn't go away. It's like looming. Even now at 45 years old, I don't think about it as much because I'm not as much in that. I'm in the environment, but I'm not like, I'm not the, the little 20-year-olds ain't looking at me anymore. You know what I mean? So it just, that's something else that contributes to stress, and that just feels like it never goes away.
Absolutely.
That struck me too, Jason, the racialized stress that a lot of times you can't even articulate, and it's not measured, but it can be measured in our cortisol levels and all this kind of stuff, but you have to go to the doctor to do all that. But how do you quantify that when you're talking about Black people and people of color? Is very hard. And then a lot of us are so disconnected from our bodies. The conversation about how stress feels in our bodies is a conversation that so many of us never have.
Right.
And so we just grow up, we don't even know that our body's actually uncomfortable because we're just so disconnected from it.
Right. Years ago, I used to teach anger management courses, and I stopped teaching anger management courses because I felt like the curriculum was distorted. The curriculum often made it seem like anger was this outside entity that was impacting people. And I changed the way that I taught it over years, because for me, I called it self-management. And in self-management, some of the tools that I would offer the participants is we would practice learning about our bodies, and we would learn about our triggers. And I would say, you know, when you're upset, how do you feel? And we would literally talk about how do we feel. I would make them upset because I would say, okay, we're not moving till we talk about how do we feel in our bodies. And some people will get like, I'm frustrated right now. Okay, good, you're frustrated right now. How do you feel? What's happening to your, man, my hands are sweaty. I just want to move on. I'm tired of talking about this. That's where I was trying to get us. I want you to feel it in your body, right? It's like, man, my shoulders are tight. Wow, okay, so when you get angry, your shoulders get tight. Your palms get sweaty. Some of us clench our jaws, right? There's something physical happening, right? But you got to be mindful of this, right? Because I would hear a lot of the participants that would come through my class and say, oh, I just snapped. And I was like, I don't believe in that. There's not a I just snapped. There are a number of physiological responses that was being communicated through your own body to you that some shit was about to pop off. And you weren't mindful of it. And when you are mindful, you are then empowered to do what? To say, hold on. Man, my hands is, you know what? Let me step back. Let me step back. Because I know this is not going in a good place. I don't know where it's going, but I can tell you when my body is talking to me right now, something ain't right. But when you have that knowledge, you could do the timeouts. Right? And some of us don't get to that point of being able to say timeout. So I think that piece is important. Other thoughts about the slide?
I also think it's just very helpful to see stress visually represented, because now it would say, oh yeah, and yup. And because like when it's up here, it's all in, it's in your body, it's in your mind, but actually seeing it, it just was different.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm explaining it enough or right.
Well, but no, that's the point. Like, that's why I made it, because here's the thing. It's not like you're just dealing with one. Like, everybody on here could pick like 10 things off that list, and that list is not exhaustive. There are tens. There's multiple things not on that list. I just made look a little brain dumb, like, let me throw this on here real quick, right? But there are a number of things that are not on there, and we're all dealing with probably like 20 of them right now as we're on this Zoom, right? And this is why I spoke to let's normalize stress, because it's present. But if we don't have the tools, that's when it impacts our wellness, right? It's the tools piece that becomes important. And, you know, I used to think years ago that, oh, well, people just need coping skills. Well, people do have coping skills. They do. Now, are they working for them? They might. Are they healthy? That's the question. People learn how to cope. You know, you put somebody in a sticky situation, they're going to figure it out. Now, how they figure it out or what they do is questionable, right? But I think we have to center wellness. And I think when we center wellness, it also gives us an opportunity to talk about some of these things that are normal stressors. I think as providers, when we are supporting fathers, we have to uplift this conversation around common stressors. We cannot omit it. We cannot minimize it. We have to have this conversation. You can take a picture. I can send you the PowerPoint. You should blow it up, put it on a piece, whatever you need to do. You can revamp it to fit your population, but it should be a common dialogue. How are we doing today? Pick one that you're dealing with, and let's talk about it. And how are you managing it? Do you need help with it? That that would be so powerful. Just that basic practice, because guess what? Most of us are not walking around talking about our stressors. Just talking about it offers relief. Just talking about it. Then having a space where if I'm bringing up something and Anthony's experiencing it too, and Anthony be like, yo, me too, that validation, what? That helps too. And then, you know what I'm saying? If Juan comes in and like, well, you know, when I deal with that, I just do this. And it's offering me another practice in community. It's like, oh, I just got validated. I just got a tool. But most of us, as healthy folk, as, you know, responsible folk, we don't even talk to our partner sometimes about our stress. So if we're not doing it, then how do we, and I'm just trying to make sure we're thoughtful about it. If we're not doing it, then I just wonder, are we missing the opportunity to engage the people that we're in service to or we're collaborating with?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Jason, it also goes back to one of you things you said earlier, celebrate and acknowledge what we deal with daily. That's what that slide did to me. I mean, we're not celebrating like, yay, I get to go through all this stuff, but it's acknowledging that, yeah, you're going through a lot and you're doing a great job of just making it. I think dads are told so often what they're not doing, and what they could be doing better. And I think just acknowledging all that these dads and people in general, parents in general, especially the poorer you are, the longer that list gets. You know what I'm saying? So just acknowledging that you are doing an amazing job just surviving with all that you have going on is important. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's what resonated with me. Your comment earlier about celebrate and acknowledge what we deal with daily. That's what that slide did for me.
Absolutely. Give thanks. Anthony, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I also thought that because there are so many contributing factors, like we might not share the same issue, or the same set of factors that the slide shows, but if we can talk about how these sets affect me and there's some crossover, I feel like it can bring the group together. Absolutely. It brings a connection to all of us that stress is the point of all this, and we all experience that, but we can come together over whatever differences, whatever is bringing that on for us. I guess it gives us a chance to connect with the group larger.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions or comments about that slide?
Well, this is maybe related or not, but I think for me, what it comes sometimes facilitating groups with people are bringing, trauma, is bringing, a lot of baggage, and, and they're allowed to talk about this and bring it up, also brings some type of unhealthy, in a way, ways to communicate things. In other words, as a facilitator, sometimes, and I have to acknowledge that it's challenging sometimes because people come with patterns of behavior and invalidation to each other. I always invite them to bring it and say, this is like a safer space where we can practice how to resolve conflicts, right? But at the same time, I felt, and part of these presentations is make me to be aware of how much it's have an impact on me, and how much is that taken from me in a way, so to be able to be there for them, but at the same time taking care of myself.
Absolutely.
I just want to bring that up.
No, give thanks. That's important. I mean, I think that's why, for me, the way that I'm presenting this, I want you to think about it for yourself, but I also want you to think about it as a provider, because to me, they're one and the same, right? If we're not well and engaged in wellness, how do we support wellness? Right? But here's the other piece too, because I've been in spaces where people have uplifted some of these things and it just becomes like a session where people are just complaining. And so it's also framing, right? With like you want people to be able to share, but you also don't want the conversation to become a conversation that lacks optimism or that lacks people feeling empowered to create change in their lives, right? Because you can get, I've had that, and you're like, oh, and you recognize, okay, we going there, right? And like, how do I now support people thinking about this from a different vantage point, that we can interrupt this, right? So that's the other piece that becomes important in this work, just around creating the space. And that is a consistent thing that we've talked about, is creating the space, right? Let me continue. Share my screen. So just as a definition, stress is a feeling of emotional or physical tension. And when I work with groups and when I've done this work, I like to provide this definition because we often talk about stress, but we often don't talk about how is it defined. And the reason why that's important is because if we don't know the definition, sometimes we also can't identify what a stressor is. And so it is a feeling that can impact us emotionally or physically. That's why I keep on talking about the physiological experience, right? And it comes from an event, right? And on that last slide, there were many events, some of them consistent events, right? Sometimes those events create thoughts, or sometimes they're isolated thoughts that make people feel what? Frustrated, angry, nervous. I could have added sad on there. I could have added a number of other emotions, but the point of this slide is to help us with our identification of stress. Because as it was noted in our dialogue, I provided, here is my short list of common stressors. However, there are a number of stressors not identified here. And so when we think about presenting something of this nature, an activity could actually be sharing something like this as a model, and then having people draw their own, where they get to sit with a group of people, identify what's a stressor in their life, and share out with a group where they feel connected and supported with, these are my stressors. And don't leave it there, but then get to the next portion being, well, how do we deal with our stressors? Here are some approaches. So then people have a level of empoweredness around stress and how stress impacts people. I think what often has helped me as an individual with stress is recognizing the effects of stress. Now, we're going to get to depression separately, but depression is on that list, and I'm going to break depression down. But depression is an effect. Anxiety, this is a level of nervousness. Now, nervousness shows up differently in everyone based in one's socialization and or life experience. But anxiety can feel like being off or feeling imbalanced. Some people have more physiological response to anxiety, and some people, they're calm, they're quiet, right? So even though these effects are common, how it exhibits itself in people might differ. Sadness, although sadness is common, everyone experiences sadness. It's what? It's 12, 15. Everyone on this Zoom has probably experienced at least 20 to 50 different emotions, and it's 12, 15. So moving through emotions is normal, okay? But sadness, you know, sometimes we have a relationship to sadness like it's a bad thing. It's normal, right? But it's also an effect of stress. And when there's a long period of sadness, it gets us back to that first point of depression, right? Some people physiologically have panic attacks. This is when you have shallow breathing, your heart is palpitating really fast. Sometimes it feels like you're going to faint. Some people lose control over managing their breath. But panic attacks feel sometimes extremely overwhelming, and it doesn't feel like you have control over your body. But this is an effect. As I spoke to earlier, stress is physiological. So whether it's panic attacks, it can also be aches and pains in the body. There are people that don't work out, or people that you know, they don't have any strenuous things happening to their bodies, but because of stress, they feel aches in their body. They feel pain in their joints. They feel tightness in their shoulders or their back. You know, the stress, you know, depending on your worldview, you know, I have spoken to some holistic doctors or holistic practitioners, and they've spoken to that you carry stress in your lower back. You carry it in your abdomen, right? This is where sometimes people get an upset stomach and they're wondering what they ate, but maybe it wasn't what you ate as much as it was what you're carrying in terms of stress. Sometimes it impacts, you know, how much sleep you're getting or the quality of sleep you're getting. Sleep apnea has often been associated with people being overweight, but there are mild cases of sleep apnea that are actually associated with stress. So people aren't getting quality sleep, and what's happening while they're sleeping is that they are taking shallow breaths, and sometimes they're holding their breath because of stress, and it's cutting off the circulation of breathing, right? Sometimes it manifests itself in headaches, dizziness, shaking. These are all physiological dynamics of stress, right? High blood pressure. Here's something we can't see, right? Sometimes we associate high blood pressure with, you know, people's weight, but high blood pressure, you can have someone that's not quote unquote overweight by medical standards and have high blood pressure. But if you don't see it, how do you respond to it? This is why being mindful of your stressors helps you to then be in tune with yourself. Because if you know that you have things that are going on that are stressful, you have to say, well, what do I have in my life that helps me to manage my stress? We have two other ones here, which is, you know, muscle tension and jaw clenching, which are also physical. These often happen when people have reached states of anger, frustration. It even happens in sleep. I can remember a time in my life when I was going through a difficult time, and I went to the dentist, not because I knew I was clenching my jaw, but I went just for a regular checkup. And my doctor actually said to me, or the dentist rather, he said, "Are you going through something?" And I looked at him with some confusion, like, "What are you talking about?" He was like, "I'm a little concerned that you be going through something because I'm looking at your mouth and I can see you must be holding your jaw tight. Are you experiencing that?" And I was like, "Nah, I don't, not that I can recall." He said, "Well, you might be doing it in your sleep." And I was like, what? And I actually had to start sleeping with a mouthpiece because I was grinding my teeth and clenching my teeth. And I had to be thought, what is going on in my life? What is going on with me? And I wasn't mindful of the stress that I was carrying. The last one is stomach or digestive problems, just around stress, right? Stress can really have an impact on us. So as I spoke to earlier, I want to normalize it because I want us to have a relationship recognizing how stress can impact wellness. But I'm not normalizing the effects in the sense that, oh, it's going to happen. No, we can actually prevent these things from happening if we have practices in our life that we engage in consistently, not like a vacation, but every day. Like if you want to manage your stress, there's something you should be doing every day to take care of yourself. Sometimes people think, well, I'm just gonna take a vacation, right? Some people that have resources, they're like, I'm gonna take a vacation. But I tell people, if you go months and months and months and months working, or months and months and months, taking care of all these responsibilities, and then you wait for 6 months to go on a week vacation, do the math. It's not going to address the harm that's happening day to day if you're waiting for a week vacation 6 months down the line. It doesn't really function like that in terms of wellness. I wanted to bring depression to the table because with a lot of our fathers, I do a lot of reading. And one of the things that I recognize is with our fathers, there's particularly fathers of color, there's been a way that we've ignored depression as community members, as providers, as practitioners in the wellness field. And we've often ignored it, not in a malicious way, but almost in a way of just not being knowledgeable of the ways that it often shows up differently for people of color or people that are marginalized. You might be thinking, well, how does it show up differently? Well, when you have to work to pay bills, there's usually not space for someone to feel disinterested or to be able to decipher whether they feel disinterested because maybe they were never interested in that job anyway. So how do you decipher whether that disinterest for that job is reflective of just that job or because of depression? This is the ways in which we haven't thought about this. So depression does come from the DSM-5. They talk about it, as depression symptoms. And, usually it's because someone has lost interest in common activities for a period of time. As I spoke to previously, we know sadness is very much connected to depression. And when people reach long periods of sadness, I believe in the DSM-5, they talk about it being longer than a month, that you then reach a place of depression because to the point that I spoke to previously, sadness is normal. So people move in and out of various emotions. That is a healthy, functioning individual. When someone becomes stagnant in a space of anxiety or in a space of sadness or in a space of frustration, that then could reach a place where a person's experiencing an illness, right? And I think we have to be mindful of what is happening with people to get them to that point. So what I shared earlier around stressors becomes so important to us not diagnosing ourselves, but being mindful of ourselves and what we can do to prevent some of these things from happening. Some of the common symptoms, and you see me air quoting here, common symptoms, and I'm saying air quotes because they're common, but everyone doesn't exhibit those behaviors. They're common, but there are other behaviors out there. And then they're common, and people can have none of these behaviors and still be depressed. And so it's creating the space to have this knowledge and creating the space for people to curate, articulate their own narratives about their experience. So irritability, this is a behavior and an emotion that we tend to minimize. And so some people don't even look at it as depression. I have misplaced aggression and anger. Unfortunately, with men, we normalize anger and aggression as a masculine trait and or behavior. We normalize it. So when we see it, we don't question it. We just accept it as a masculine trait and or behavior. But anger and aggression both are masked emotions, meaning there's something beneath those emotions that we need to get to, because that will help us get to what is the issue, what is the stressor or the grief or the trauma that that person has endured or is enduring. We've seen addictive behaviors. It could be excessive drinking or drug use. Once again, we normalize some people using substances. So because we normalize it, we don't look at it as being problematic. Or some people have used it as a coping mechanism for so long that they don't recognize that when we talk about addiction, we talk about functionality. Like there is social substance use where there are people that drink in community. Some people smoke in community, right? There's a difference between using and addiction. Some people use, some people are addicted. Addicted to me and my understanding of the places in which I've done research and or been taught, addiction is about a functionality, meaning that people rely on it for their daily operations, so to speak. Escape of behaviors, looking at self-medicating, promiscuity, like having multiple partners. They're trying to escape into sex. Sometimes people sleeping for hours upon hours, right? The list goes on. You can talk about complaints of stress, guilt, being pessimistic, this not having a positive outlook on the world, withdrawn, right? Once again, here is a behavior that sometimes might get associated with a personality, and so it gets missed. There are people that are not very social people. And so we go, oh, that person, that's just how they are. Well, how do you know that when you met them, they were already going through something? And so you assume that that was just a personality trait rather than a symptom of what he or she are enduring. These are important questions to ask ourselves. And a lot of hopelessness, right? Even thoughts of suicide. I tell people from my experience as a therapist over the years, usually people that are suicidal have not just thought about it. If they are in a place of serious help, they have thought about the ways in which they would take their life. It's not a fleeting thought, it's a constant thought. There has been maybe even ways in which they have drawn it out, so to speak. So these symptoms that I have here is a list. It's not exhaustive. And dependent on one's circumstances or personality or behaviors, this list could be accurate and or it could be totally off. But empowering our fathers to have this information becomes important for them around self-management and understanding of their experience.
Jason, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
You talked about anger and how anger is masking other issues that are going on or other emotions that are going on. Isn't it I'm trying to say it's okay to get angry. It's the inability to get over it or overreacting to things, correct? Like it's normal to get angry.
Yes.
Sometimes.
No, yeah.
Okay.
Anger is normal.
Okay.
My point around masking it is that, let's just say you're angry, right? I still would say there's something under that, right? It makes me think about how if you ever had a curfew or if you're a parent and you got kids and you give them a curfew, let's just say curfew 10 o'clock, okay? At 10 o'clock, they're not coming in, one of your daughters not coming in, how you feeling?
Not happy.
You're not happy?
Not happy.
You're not happy, right?
Right.
Okay, so now an hour has passed. You ain't got a text, a phone call, nothing. What you feeling?
Scared.
Okay. Now 2 hours has passed by and she strolls in. What you feeling?
Pissed.
Okay. But what's the real emotion under that though?
Fear.
Exactly. That happens all the time.
All the time, yeah.
Right. So like that's my whole thing is like I don't minimize anger, but I always tell people go beneath it. Cause you could also been disappointed, like, dang man, I thought we had a relationship where at least you would call. You weren't thoughtful enough about, your mom and I, we up worried, you got siblings, we all concerned, and you just strolling, you ain't get a text, phone call, no nothing. You like, what's up? I thought we was better than that. We ain't cool. Like, because parents get their feelings hurt too, right? So that's the pieces that I always tell people, go beneath that anger. So yes, anger is normal and it's okay. But if we want to really go to that place, what's under it?
Got you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No doubt.
Okay, that slide with all the boxes, but how your constant comparison for how some of the how men present is tandem to how they are. So it can be depression, it can be these masks. That to me is a huge conversation because men are not in spaces where they can fully express their humanity. That's what I got from that slide is you're not a full human because we can't see you in all right. That's where I am from that slide.
Well, I think it's one, I would agree with you. And I think the problem is we haven't created a definition outside of the larger society that allows us to have a human experience. Masculinity as we know it has been curated by white men. And for some folk, we have allowed our circumstances to define it for us. And then we have some really rigid ideas around masculinity. And so it's like, be stoic, be a provider, be responsible, be a protector. And all of it is like posturing, like I'm strong, like I got this. Like no, there's not a masculine trait that says it's okay to not have it. There's not a masculine trait to say, you know what, like sometimes that stuff scares me. Even saying like I had one of the stressors identified as fear of failure. Masculinity doesn't allow you to say, I'm a man, I'm afraid of failing. When men start talking like that, it's because they've been in spaces, or they've been reared, or they've been given permission to access that part of themselves. But the way that masculinity is communicated in some households, in some communities, is very much like fear. Not like, it reminds me of that hip hop song that came out, I believe, like the late 90s, early 2000s by I forget the brother. Oh, Bone Crusher. He was saying, I ain't never scared. And it was like, nah, bruh. Like, that whole song is a farce. You ain't never scared. But to me, even that was like, I am wearing my masculinity. It's like we put on a coat of masculinity. Okay, put on my coat of masculinity, and it's gonna be all of the things the world has said I'm supposed to be. We have to create space for people to take off that coat and show up in their humanness. So if we in this conversation, I'm like, oh, let me add to that stressor masculinity as a stressor. You know, but once again, like, where are the spaces for us to have these dialogues? Right? As providers, we should be thoughtful about these things and create space to have these dialogues. That's why the relationship building becomes so important. Right? Because if I don't even trust you, I'm not about to talk about this with you. Like, and the only reason why I could talk about it, because I didn't process that. I got people I process with, them constantly, learning about it. But I do check-ins too. I ask my friends all the time, how am I doing with my misogyny? Because part of masculinity is misogynistic. So I had to check on my, the women in my life that love me enough to be like, you still got some learning to do. But this is the work, right? I have a few more slides because I want to get to the place where we're talking about what do we do, right? What do we do about all of this, right? And I also want to talk about another one outside of depression that I think is important for us to talk about. So let me go back to sharing real quick. I'm mindful of time. I appreciate folks that are on here. I hope this is helpful. And because I am going fast, as I spoke to earlier, I will make sure I send this slide presentation to Kevin, and he can send it out to you all, and y'all will have access to it. I don't care if you use it. Please use it. Please alter it. Do what you need to do to make it yours. I wanted to get to this trauma. So we talked about stressors, effects of stress. We talked about depression. I want to get to trauma, because when we think about that list of stressors, sometimes those stressors can cause what? Trauma. What is trauma? It's an injury caused externally, usually by a violent force or an event. But injuries can also be what? Beyond physical. It could be emotional, psychological, or spiritual, right? Well, what's the impact? It can distort someone's attitude and beliefs. When something is distorted, it's altered, it's skewed, it's off. Sometimes it impacts you in a way where you're not thinking in a realistic manner. So trauma, I want to normalize that too. So I've normalized a few things in this conversation today. I've normalized stress. I've normalized sadness. And now I'm normalizing trauma, if you keep in record. And the reason why I'm normalizing it is because in this society in which we live in, it's difficult to be free of these injury that can be emotional. Well, sometimes we get harmed vicariously. What does that mean? It means that you could be talking to your family member, they share something with you that is harmful. You could be impacted by the harm they're sharing with you. That's trauma. You could see something, that's trauma. You can be involved in something, that's trauma. I spoke to my experience earlier about being pulled over, and I've normalized that. And that's trauma. those red flashing lights, my chest palpitating because of, my heart rate increasing. Over time, what's the harm that's being done? This is trauma. So if we know stress can cause trauma, then we have to be mindful that trauma, because of stress, is a barrier to what? Wellness. Right? We started off talking about what does wellness feel like. Well, sometimes it's difficult to experience what it feels like if the trauma is present, or we're not mindful of what's actually impacting us, right? Possible causes of trauma: racism, like that's on the list of stressors. Racism, you can talk about white supremacy. And when I think of white supremacy, I think of like the layers of oppression. So we could talk about internalized racism. We can talk about interpersonal. We can talk about structural. We could talk about institutional. So there's layers of racism that I would use the umbrella of white supremacy to begin to unpack. But this is the reality of people from marginalized communities. We could talk about discrimination. We can talk about poverty. This wasn't even on our stressor list. I think I alluded to it with finances and unemployment, but poverty in itself impacts people, right? Economic hardship, life stressors, that whole list. All of these things can be possibly related and or a cause to trauma. And so I normalize trauma. Like when I have worked with young people, people say at-risk youth, and I say all are at risk. And I think all people are at risk of trauma because of the type of communities we live in. Even if you live in an affluent community, we still live in America. And if you watch the news or if you're on social media, there are numbers of stories. There's a brother that I think that was like last night, a news story came out about a brother that was shot and killed by a cop. And it's so normal now, it doesn't feel new. It almost feels like, deja vu. Like, well, didn't I just read that story? You probably did, but this is a new event that causes trauma. I mean, as a Black man living in America, I can't tell you how often I think of my own death. And I think I'm more mindful of it for two reasons. One, because of trauma, because of stress and all the things we're talking about, but also because I'm a parent. And I'm very mindful of my children's welfare. And it would sadden me for my children to not have me, because I know the role I play in their life. And not that they don't have other people like their parent, like their mom or my family, but fathers are important because fathers show up in ways that mothers can't, and vice versa. Mothers do things that fathers can't, right? I think about my son's mom. She's amazing. What she does, I can't do. But we lean on each other to provide a holistic experience for our children, right? So this becomes important when we think about trauma, right? So as practitioners and providers, we have to teach or create spaces to define and practice resilience, right? So this is the capacity to deal constructively with change. Change is inevitable. Just how I normalize sadness, stress, right? Trauma, those three that I have normalized, those create what? Changes in our lives or challenges in our lives. So we have to help people have the tools to deal with life changes, right? And to maintain themselves, specifically like their wellness, right, in the face of difficult events, because challenges are going to come. So as those challenges come, how do people respond is resilience. It's the how that we have to teach. Some people already have the how, but the how isn't healthy. I'll say that again. Some people already have the how, but the how isn't healthy. So we have to teach and create space to practice this. This is where we miss the mark. We'll have workshops like this. We'll come, we'll get the terminology, we'll see the slideshow. Oh, this is great. But how the brain functions is that you have that one touch with it. But the next part of learning, and this comes from learning science, you have to practice it. You got to practice what resilience is, the how. So we got to create spaces to practice the how, and then you can go into your life and apply it. Then you can come back and reflect, okay, so when we did the resilience practice in class or in our session, this was working. When I went out, this didn't work. Okay, now we can talk about what you can alter. But it's the practice that gets people to a place of exploring, learning, and fine-tuning the how. This other thing that we have to teach is mindfulness, right? So what I would say in this slide is we have to teach people to be fully present and aware of what's going on. And I spoke to this earlier in the sense that when you're managing yourself, you can feel what's going on in your body. When you're managing yourself, you have the ability to be thoughtful about what's happening around you, whether it's with yourself or outside of you. If you're mindful, then you're more likely to understand what are the steps for me to address this matter without feeling consumed, overwhelmed, or more stressed. It's the mindfulness. So these two that I've offered, the resilience and the mindfulness, are opportunities for providers to create spaces to do what? Let's play around with this. So whether it's, I gave you all the list of stress, you can, like I said, you can alter that. You could do an activity where the fathers you work with can create their own to present it. You can create scenarios to deal with both the mindfulness and the resilience. So then people can go into their homes, into their families, and explore the how. And then they can come back and work with you around, okay, did it work? It didn't work, and get communal support around how to fine tune the how. When I think of like wellness, I put here, it's more than just the absence of illness, right? But it includes health and safety, social and emotional health, and spiritual wellness, right? And it's subject, like, it's subjective to a sense, right? In the sense of wellness, well-being, which means that everybody gets to define it for themselves, right? But for me, this is important, right? That we're thoughtful about is not just having like illness that impacts health and wellness, but it's what is our reality in terms of our immediate physical safety, our emotional safety, our social safety, and well-being. And how I always talk about spirit is not in a religious sense. It could be, but I talk about spirit in the sense of the energy in your body. And when you touch somebody, you can feel spirit. Some people have there's a saying, you woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Usually you feel off. That's the energy. And what I always have supported the folks that I work with on is, how do you get in tune with that energy in your body? And how do you adjust that energy in your body when you've had difficult moments with people, or you woke up on the wrong side of the bed, or somebody have transferred their negative energy over to you? But it's empowering to know how to engage your own spirit, right? Let me go here, right? This is my last two slides right here. It's looking at healthy coping skills. What I tell those that I work with is that you got to get to know yourself. I have a list of things just in terms of how do you respond to those stressors? When we spoke to those stressors earlier, healthy coping skills is what people need. You have to spend time figuring out what gives back to you, what helps to regulate the stress that you have in your life, what helps you to feel happy, what helps you to feel a sense of relief. And so everyone's different. Everyone's different. Like people that play video games, I know people that need to, make music. Everybody's different, but you got to figure out what is your thing, right? I'm not a very artistic person, so drawing and painting would not be my thing. However, as I said to you all earlier, I'm a runner, and I put on my running shoes, throw on my music. I got a run playlist, and I'm in a whole nother world. And it's my sacred space. And how I knew that it was my space, one time when I first started running, my headphones, they died. And I thought I needed music to run. And I still went into a whole nother place without the music. And I said, oh, this is my thing. This is working for me. The other thing around healthy coping is like recognizing that certain things are practices to support wellness, and there's something about like releasing like tension. And we talked about stress being tension in your body. Sometimes people need to emote physically, right? So exercise, crying, yelling, screaming. We look at those things as being sometimes not the most productive ways, but like years ago, I used to take boxing classes at a place in Hayward, and we used to all, I think class was like 6 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. And there were actually more women in that class than men. And we would start off with, calisthenics or whatnot, and then we would go to the body bag. And I remember one time saying, yo, man, these people, whoever their partners are, should be happy that they come in here first, because they're releasing on these body bags. And I couldn't even imagine what they would be releasing at home if they didn't have the body bag. They were engaged in a healthy release. Whatever that day was, whoever they engaged with, whatever they were carrying, they were releasing on that body bag. And some of us need a body bag, whether we're talking physically or metaphorically, we need that tension relief. And I'll just throw this up here. This is when we talk about support, right? There are a number of things that could be offered. And I've been identifying these things throughout the presentation, right? That support wellness. And I'll end on this. Wellness is a practice. Every day, we have an opportunity to support our wellness, but we need the tools to do it. Questions, comments, thoughts, reflections?
Well, Jason, thank you. It's always an experience to be in your presence, and I'm so grateful for everything you share with us. You always bring something new to me. So I appreciate that. I had a question about resilience, and just in the general sense, because I think about resilience a lot, is that some folks, especially I think, in my work in East Oakland, and Black and brown men and families, have to be more resilient than in other communities. Like resiliency seems like a burden that they have to carry beyond what is normal. So as I think about that, I feel like it's unfair, and I also understand the value of it. I just was wondering how you thought about that, because I get tired of hearing.
I hate it. I hate the word.
Yeah.
I would agree. There is an unnecessary burden put on Black and brown communities. And we have to recognize that how we respond and how we engage literally supports our own livelihood. I think what I struggle with a lot of times is how we normalize, like people say, oh, these kids are so resilient. That to me is such a trigger for me, right? But it's like, what is the other option? Or, like, and the way people talk about it is like it's an innate thing, but to your point, it's a circumstantial thing that people have to do, right? So yeah, that's how I think about it. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, reflections? I don't like.
So do you think it's patronizing to acknowledge and celebrate the resilience that our families exhibit? By, like I said, just making it through the day, given what they have to do?
Yeah. I think to the point that Anthony was bringing up, here's what I've learned in our work. Now, it's not even a social justice setting, but it's social justice. You can't even talk about what we're talking about without alluding to social justice. That said, we have to understand the nuances. It's never just this or that, right? So the nuance of this dialogue is resiliency in the ways that it is spoken about is problematic. The necessity of it is important. The recognition of how people are living is needed. So it's like sometimes I think we want this either or, but it's complex, it's nuanced. And so we as providers have to create space for people to have the different levels of engagement with it, because most of us only have one engagement. We need to create space where we can have multiple realities around certain topics. And I think it allows us to have a different relationship to it, where we don't feel like it's being placed on us, but we can now be thoughtful about it in various ways. And maybe it even influences, to my point, our how.
Interesting. Any final thoughts, questions, comments for Jason? Jason, as always, you killed it. That's what you do. I just appreciate your just command of the content, your just relatability, and just your commitment to community and our families and to us, and the work that we do. And I just appreciate you very much. And every time you come, you like Anthony said, you bring something new. And I, continue to be in awe of your, just you, brother. So thank you. I appreciate you very much.
Give thanks. I appreciate the space to be present with you all. Yeah, give thanks.
Absolutely.